All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out today to our Climate Action Speaker Series event. Really appreciate you all being here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ryan Sharp. I'm Assistant Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Business Engagement, and I lead the Innovation and Business Engagement Hub. We act as the point of entry for industry partners, investors, and entrepreneurs to engage with the university's discoveries, innovations, talent, and resources. We also manage a suite of innovation and entrepreneurship programs and coordinate engagement with a wide range of campus and community stakeholders. This series is actually part of our Climate Action Solutions Catalyst program, which provides funding, capacity building, and engagement opportunities, all aimed at advancing innovative work that addresses some of the state's most pressing climate challenges. And we are currently actually accepting applications for our Climate Action Solutions Incubator program, which provides small-scale supplemental funding and access to capacity-building workshops and mentorship in order to advance action-oriented solutions. If you'd like to learn more about the program, you can see my colleague Sue, who's sitting at the check-in table, raising her hand, or there's also a display on that table with a QR code where you can go straight to the page with the application materials. And then please don't hesitate to reach out to us at all if we can be supportive in any other way. We're here to help. So today, following the speaker's presentation, there will be an opportunity for you all to ask a few questions. And after we wrap up the Q&A, we'll invite you to stick around and network for a bit. We have a few snacks and refreshments in the back, and we really hope you'll use this opportunity to make some new connections to explore collective opportunities to advance climate action solutions. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Arvind Gupta, who will be sharing an investor's perspective on trends in planetary health innovation. Arvind is a partner at the global venture capital firm Mayfield, where he focuses on investments in human and planetary health. He's been an inception stage investor for a number of breakout companies focused on making an impact in human and planetary health. And he also founded IndieBio, a prominent early stage biotech venture capital fund and company builder, where he invested in over 136 companies in the 5-year period and grew the portfolio into billions of dollars of value. And if all of that wasn't already enough, he also co-authored in 2020, Decoding the World, a roadmap for the questioner, the first book in a series documenting the most critical decade in the fight against climate change. So Arvind is also a product of the UC system, receiving a degree in genetic engineering from UC Santa Barbara, just down the road. So please join me in welcoming Arvind to the stage.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks all of you for coming and attending. I think it's an important topic and a more timely one than ever, as you'll see shortly. What I want to talk to you today about is capitalism and climate change and how those things relate. And most people, when I talk about capitalism, immediately come to the idea or the notion that capitalism is the root cause of climate change, which of course we can talk about it as being true. Somewhat true in that you are providing, and we'll get more details, you're providing as much as possible in the short term for people's needs. But I think what's also important is to think about how capitalism, the same exact mechanism, could reverse those same effects. So we're going to talk about building enduring planetary health businesses. Businesses that have sustainability in mind, but the right unit economics and the right building blocks to actually last a long time and create the value and the change they're meant to. So you heard a little bit about me. My background is genetic engineering, but also product design, where I learned how to build businesses through product, and also finance, where I learned to make very quick decisions. And so putting all that together to build IndieBio was very helpful around thinking about how new technologies could come together to solve fundamental problems around creating more for more people with less resources. And that led me to Mayfield to scale those learnings up and do them with fewer companies, but in a deeper way. So one fundamental question that we have to just get out of the way is, why is this even important? Why does it matter? I think, given the venue of this talk, you all get this and believe that climate change is not only real, but will create real effects, both economically and socially. And this is a graph of the change in temperature over time. You've seen this a million ways in a million different forms. So again, this isn't something that is going to change your guys' mind. But really, one of the things that I look for as an investor, and all investors, especially ones that think about long-term, look for long trends, waves that you could surf for a long time where a lot of innovation will happen. We're talking about, this is that's a 80, 100-year arc that is being shown. So that's a wave that continues to go. It's not going to reverse anytime soon, like catastrophic. It's something that's going to provide the soil for more innovation. So it's a huge entrepreneurial opportunity. And there is an ancillary effect to what's going on, which is the effects of climate change and the effects of consumption are creating disparities in what people can access through creating inequality. So even if you don't believe climate change is something to be solved for, inequality is a good one that you can get behind. And so we talked about enduring planetary health businesses. Why is that important? Because dead companies don't change the world. That simple. And philanthropies are limited in their scope, fundamentally. The engine of change over time is capitalism, and it's delivered through businesses. So I think sustainable businesses have to be sustainable as a business first. It's a pretty obvious one. But I think one of the things that is important to think about is what creates a really great business that could last a long time. And we did have Clean Tech 1.0. That's something that happened in 2008-ish timeframe. And there was a lot of excitement around an energy transition back then, because oil was spiking to over $150 a barrel. And so a lot of energy and a lot of investment dollars went into a first wave of companies making biofuels, things like that. And so there's been some learnings from that. And you can see, like, one of the most important lessons really is investing in high technology to make a very inexpensive commodity is a difficult business to make work, because the gross margins are going to be just too low based on the amount of technology, expensive technology you're using and implementing to make that product. And there's a natural switching cost, a natural substitute product that has no switching cost nearly if it's a commodity. So that becomes very difficult. I think the other thing is, pursuant to that, if you are going to be an enterprise business, if you don't own a big part of the bill of materials of your customer, i.e., say half or 20% of the actual cost of the product in the end, it's very hard to have pricing power, because it means that you're not really important to the final value proposition. So all of these things led to the first Clean Tech 1.0 difficulties and headwinds, where not only were the products difficult to make, but as soon as the price of oil fell, those technologies no longer mattered, because you went straight back to the old commodity. But today is different, and it's not just because of Greta Thunberg, but she's a great emblem of it, which is, and why I like to call this climate tech, and even that I think needs to change. But haven't had a good idea of what that next phrase could be. Maybe you guys could help. Versus clean tech. And that's because there's a real social movement behind this problem. And this problem is different than the price of a barrel of oil. The price of a barrel of oil was clean tech 1.0. We're going to no longer need oil. Okay, we'll make something cheaper. Now it's the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And that's a fundamentally different problem than how much oil is going to cost. So what is the metric of success then for climate tech? Well, lowering the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, as opposed to lowering the price of a unit equivalent of a barrel of oil. And so I think one of the things that's different, right, is climate tech or clean tech 1.0 is driven by investors solely. So like when clean tech 1.0 wiped out, and no one cared, and no one cared to begin with. But now we have a broad-based social movement that's supporting these changes, and that social movement starts with the younger generation and extend upward. But the silver lining in clean tech 1.0 is that the costs of a lot of the clean tech technologies and other ancillary technologies dropped dramatically. The prices of synthetic biology dropped because there's a lot of infrastructure for fermentation. Photovoltaics dropped. I mean, here you can see the price of DNA sequencing has cratered over time. What this means is you can do a lot of new things with a small amount of dollars, which enables innovation at a more rapid pace. Which is a good thing, because as I said earlier, human desires are unlimited. This was a great line that I remember from my first economics class at UC Santa Barbara, where it was like literally one of the first sentences he said, human desires are unlimited, that's why we have the field of economics. And so when we think about Adam Smith's hand of the invisible hand of the economy, it's really, to me, the hand of the consumer. They drive where everything goes, where dollars get invested, where dollars don't get invested, what kind of products are built, what isn't. So that's extremely important to remember, but it gives me hope, because that tells me, well, capitalism then can be a mechanism for reversing climate change. And the lever, so to speak, of that mechanism would be the consumer or the customer. Now, how do we unlock that is the question, because one thing else is true. If you ask most people, do you care about the future of the planet or climate change, most people will say yes. If you ask them, how much would you pay to make that happen, most people will say zero. So that presents a conundrum for sustaining planetary health. But luckily, if we think hard through capitalism, we can maybe find a way. And if we don't find a way, it's going to be tough, because we have 5 Earths of demand for goods and 1 Earth of supply. And this is due mostly to the rising global middle class, and which is a great thing. But again, everyone wants more and more stuff. Deserve that from where they're coming from. And so how do we supply that in a way that doesn't destroy the one planet we have for the future? Because capitalism, what makes it great and what makes it, and its biggest shortcoming, the double-edged sword of capitalism, is it's short-term. And so if everyone wants something now, capitalism will find a way to deliver it at the expense of the future. I think there's one sort of silver lining that's pointing the way to why this might change. And that is market forces based on customer demand, and knowing that they don't really want to pay for it, but they love people who do, is large corporations. So here we have, what's that number? I think it's $33 trillion of revenues It's up there. I can't, that's off of memory, but I could be wrong. $33 trillion of revenues globally in Fortune 500 companies that have created climate goals, climate action. Why are they doing that? Why? Why would they take dollars that would otherwise go into increasing their stock value by reinvesting it in some place or creating a dividend? Why would they go and make climate goals? Because they know it will accrue to goodwill. It increases their brand. It increases employee retention. Things that people care about but don't have to pay for out of their own pocket, corporates can then use as leverage to create that goodwill. So what I'm hoping is a better capitalism, for lack of same capitalism, but pointed in a better direction, will give people what they want now without having to steal from the future. And if we could do that, it's a massive, massive opportunity. The global economy roughly doubles every 20 years. And so we're talking about $100 trillion in 20 years of new revenues in these sectors that can all be made sustainable. So that's what we're talking about. I mean, we're already hearing, right, fuels, like aviation fuels. How do you make that green? Like, you can see the automotive sector already changing. We'll talk about that in a bit. But that's going to continue to roll through the way I think about these sectors. Feeding all the world's carbon flows through these human activities, feeding the world, building the world, empowering the world. So that's a simplified way of how I think about things. And so, if I'm in the audience, I'm like, yeah, Arvind, awesome. Yeah, we need to do things in a better way, but there's a big problem, which is if we had that, then we would be doing it that way already, right? And that's true, which is why it's an entrepreneurial opportunity, because recent advances in biology, physics, AI, and chemistry are enabling completely new efficiencies that we haven't seen before, able to solve the paradox of more with less. That's the key. Able to solve the paradoxes of circularity in economies. And so that's the golden opportunity, and why we need to think about, instead of saying, consume less. It's just a hard message. But can we help people make selfish choices of consuming more that's better for them, but also sustainable? You would normally say no, but you'll see now some technologies that are being developed right now as we speak, and you're probably involved, many of you are involved in some of them, that are promising in breaking some of those paradoxes. I'm not going to read this, obviously. I just want to show just a smattering, completely inexhaustive, off the top of my head, some of the areas in biology that are being innovated today. From carbon capture in biomass to solving methane emissions, all synthetic biology, computation in genetics, computation in ecological systems. Biodiversity, I think, is something that is now just starting to become an area that people can see, not just it's important for the world, but also there's economic activity within that. So I think there's a lot of things happening just in biology that can make real inroads in building sustainable businesses. I'll give you a few examples, and I understand that many of you are interested in some of these types of innovations, so I'll slow down here just a tad. Windfall Bio is a Mayfield investment, and they're using methanotroph consortia to convert methane emissions from oil and gas, dairy farms, as well as landfills, which are dilute. There's no way to eliminate dilute methane emissions because you can't flare it, you can't do anything, it just goes in the air. But methanotrophs can eat dilute methane and use that to grow. in essence becoming a biomass that you can use to enrich organic fertilizer. So they've built a business around doing that. The Every company was an indie bio company in the very first batch, making egg whites without the chicken. What are you going to do with that? Well, it's not just egg whites. It's can you change the mix of the proteins in that egg white to be fluffier in some applications or denser in others? So they're using that to put it in smoothies and macarons. And really it's just starting to sell these performance egg white proteins to other businesses. Geltor is similarly creating human collagens and animal collagens for both makeup as well as dietary applications. And they're doing that through precision fermentation. Again, by eliminating the cows and the animals that are using to get that collagen to begin with, we could make these products more sustainable for people. But again, making a better product at the same time because it's more pure. You're making just that one protein. Upside Foods, one of the hundreds of cell-based meats companies now out there. And the idea that, well, plant-based foods are facsimiles of proteins and meats that people want. Would a better tasting alternative protein be actual meat that doesn't have to come from the cow or the chicken or whatever animal you're eating? So lots of innovation around these areas as well. So that's just biology. Chemistry has another whole set of innovations happening as a field. And so in chemistry, we have things like matter transformation, right? The study of matter. So this is going to be a crucial field of study to figure out how do we best utilize different molecules like carbon dioxide. If we need to lower the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it'll be really good if we could find something useful to do with it rather than pump it underground. I would say that's probably one of the most useful things we can do in the next 10 years to enable true reversal of climate change, not just mitigation of it. How do we take CO2 from the atmosphere and use those carbons to recombine with other molecules efficiently to create new products? Which is what 12 is doing. And that's just one of 100 companies also working in this space. Climeworks is doing direct air capture. My wife is Icelandic, so I got to know them a long time ago as they had their first site in Iceland. And the idea, I think there's also something to be said for being first and showing something could work, and then companies building on that innovation and creating V2s, V3s, and V4s of those directions. Lithos is another company that's doing enhanced rock weathering, speeding up the natural geologic process of carbon sequestration through rain and mountain slides sloughing off into the ocean, but just doing that by putting out basalt in farmland, where the irrigation then sloughs the CO2 removal back out to the ocean. So this is enhanced rock weathering is actually a very scalable technology, and I think there's a lot of promise there. And there's now a few companies really starting to innovate in this area. Lithos just recently was announced a $50-something million purchase order or letter of intent from the Frontier Fund and Google. So there's again, going back to the climate goals, there's real dollars starting to create revenues for these companies that make investors say, there could be a future here. Lindgrove is a company that makes wood without trees by taking flax and impregnating that with a bioresin to make a wood. The top of the guitar is made with their material called Ecoa. That's not indistinguishable from a natural wood, but stronger than it and lighter than it. Physics is another area that's going to be critically important. Why? Physics governs energy and so a lot of those laws. So you're going to see a lot of the companies that are using physics marrying energy, material science, and things like that to create new ways of powering things and moving things. Commonwealth fusion system. So it used to be, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, fusion was a science fiction, true science fiction idea. And with some papers recently published, as well as over $2 billion raised, people believe Commonwealth it's really turned into an engineering problem rather than we're going to do endless science. But the science is now getting tractable enough to turn into an engineering exercise. A big exercise, an expensive exercise. But nonetheless, fusion, while there's a lot of ways to generate nuclear energy, generate electricity, electrons flowing, one that never turns off, or one that doesn't need to turn off when the sun goes down or when the wind dies, is the best renewable. And then moving these electrons around without having half of them go into the ground or be lost by heat. So unearthly materials and others are working on superconducting materials for power transmission and other applications. This is so broad-based, it would literally change a lot of the unit economics around different industries. There was also that whole K99, I think it was called, Twitter thing. So it's a hard problem, and there are many believe that it's potentially not solvable or physically impossible, but we don't know. Then nuclear power, right? So the reinvention or reimagination of good old-fashioned nuclear. It's been around forever. How do we make it safer, smaller? Because it doesn't turn off, and guess what? It's not a science project or an engineering project. We could just do it now. It's a very well-known old technology. The question here is, how do we get public acceptance of this, given its history? And the technology that's kind of wrapping it all together is AI and computation and enabling faster and faster iterations. And LLMs and all forms of generative AI and machine learning are coming together to really create optimizations, but also imagine new material spaces. If we look at chemics, it's using AI for battery performance and optimization and design and production. So chemics sells batteries, better batteries, because they could use AI to look at all the electrolyte mixtures and optimize for different applications where others might not be able to. This is also a Mayfield investment. AMP Robotics is a company that's using AI and robotics to sort through recycling and enable circular economies to work by labeling, sorting, and getting rid of some of that hurdle that is in place when you have unrefined waste products, and people are like, that's not worth the headache, I'll just buy the new stuff. Avalo is a company that's using AI to better predict genotype to phenotype. And so they're using that to create better crops. And they're working on, right now, a 10x better cotton, which would be low water cotton with very high quality fibers. That would change the cotton industry pretty fundamentally based on the amount of water that is consumed for 90% of the cotton that we use in our clothes. It's actually a small proportion of the amount of cotton that's actually grown. The Framework 44 is a small company that's using LLMs to design catalysts for matter transformation, specifically CO2 into different materials. So you could see, right? Like I think deploying, these are a bunch of technologies, but they're all being deployed through products, right? None of them was just here's a here's a technology. There's products that people sell. And there's only, 3 ways to market adoption for what you're selling, right? One is make something better. There's make something cheaper, or require you to buy it because it's required by law. As a VC, I can't predict requiring by law. Cheaper products leads to low margins and very difficult businesses to create venture returns. So market adoption is generally created through, in innovation, better products. So if we then put it all together, we can logically conclude, right, the best sustainability companies with these innovations are going to be the very best product companies. And we can start to look around for examples of that. And I think the best example of that for me is Tesla. I think, and I have a personal kind of story about it because our Subaru Outback died, and I have 2 girls, 6 and 8, and it just like died spontaneously. So we rented a Toyota Sienna, which is like this big, like it's an apartment on wheels, and the girls loved it, right? Because it's like an apartment on wheels. And so we're gonna get a Sienna, right? Okay, I don't care. I'm not a car guy. And so my wife's like, we should just try a Tesla, like be sustainable. Okay, let's go do that. We go to test drive it as a family, turn the corner, and I stomp on the accelerator, and it goes really fast when you stomp on the accelerator. And the girls start screaming in delight, and they're like, they start chanting Tesla. And the family made a product decision at that moment. There was zero talk of environmentalism or sustainability. It was just like, this is so fun, we're not going to get the Sienna. And they were set on the apartment on wheels. So I think that is a great example of creating such a better product that you're just buying it because it's a selfish, better purchase, whether it's better for the environment or not. So thinking through this, it led me to think about this question. And Naveen and I talked about this a lot. Naveen's the managing director at Mayfield. What are the common traits of a really great planetary health company? How do we know one when we see one? It's a good question. So how do you answer that question? Well, we could look through kind of the history of companies that we've invested in at Mayfield, at IndieBio, and what are the great public market comparables that are better products and better for the environment? And what do they all have in common? So I'm going to speed through these so we could get to a conversation, but which is always more interesting to me than me just talking at guys. But the first one, this is what's common. It's uncompromising founders, especially in the space that we're talking about with creating great planetary health companies, because it's so easy to compromise. And uncompromising founders set a planetary scale problem in their mind and set that as the North Star and then don't deviate. And by not deviating, you find ways that, through pain, suffering, and whatnot, that others just didn't because they compromised. And so by definition, they also become leaders of the movement, which then starts to attract N of 1 teams, what I call N of 1 teams. This is the A team for anyone that was born back then, probably nobody in here. But the A team was an old TV show about a group of, they were like ex-cons that did good. But anyway, the point is N of 1 teams are uncompromising as well and are able to do things that other teams can't. And when you get that kind of group of people together around a table, a lot of stuff happens that seemed impossible before. And those teams could then create a 10x product because it's uncompromised and the right people around the room. So what's a 10x product? A friend of mine asked me that. And what do you mean a 10x product? What does that mean? I was like, okay, well, the best way to describe it is a product that once you use it, you can't imagine going the other way. going back to the old way. The iPhone's a great example of that. Once people used a full screen, like when you really think about it, and I was designing phones back at that time, the idea of not having a keyboard was a laughable idea. It was completely laughable. Most of you guys probably don't remember this, but there was keys on phones. And the notion that you would just do a full thing and then AI, or like, the computer would help you type as fast, was something that was preposterous. But it does turn out that it becomes a 10x better experience, and therefore the whole world switched within a couple of years to the new configuration. So great planetary health companies always lead with a 10x better product, always. And they do so in markets that are also extremely large. So a 10x better product that takes some carbon out of a tiny little market, it's great for that tiny little market, but it's not going to have planetary health implications. So we need to have super ambitious goals with what we're trying to accomplish, but also very focused execution through a 10x better product that unlocks it. Because 10x better products also, now let's get to what makes an enduring business, high gross margins. Number one predictor of the future success of a company. Because there's a lot of things that go into a high gross margin. One, you're not a commodity, right? You're not spending a lot to make something that's cheap. You're creating something that people will pay a premium for because it's just so much better. And I think there's an interesting learning here. Negative gross margin, the idea that, oh yeah, we'll start out making a loss and then eventually we'll make money, just doesn't happen. You start by creating a product that's amazing, people will pay you for it, and then work to lower the cost so you could make even more money to put back into the company and expand what your market is. And generally, again, this goes back to large markets, you want to be a daily habit. So what is the, Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, a lot of the food companies, they're daily habits. The spend is fast, switching cost is low. You drive a car every day, if you're driving a car mostly. And these experiences reinforce each other and get you to talk about them. And that's how you can grow with low spend. And that low spend, again, goes back to gross margin. Sorry, operating margin. I'm getting, at the risk of turning this into an economics talk, but just for precision. These companies also control their own destiny through how they talk about what they do with the end customer. So this is a company, MycoWorks, out of IndieBio, that has made an alternative leather using mushrooms. And they've branded their material Reishi. Reishi is now known by name in the trade. So it's not, oh, the alternative mushroom leather that then gets commoditized. And because of this, they can go out to market independent of their customers and have that conversation and then keep that margin high because the customers are demanding that product. Another trait here is they tend to be vertically integrated companies because there's an innovation in the production side, but they're turning that into a product. So you want to innovate in the assembly line big time. And generally, I think this is where climate tech is going to sort of accrue value, is how can you innovate in the assembly line such that no one else can touch your cost of goods or your quality, even if they like what you're doing. Because once it's seen that what you're doing is working, everyone will come in to copy it. Well, this is a moat. So that's the GigaPress, which makes the Model Y in 3 parts. No one else can do that. So there is a long-term, or there's a large moat around that's created around Tesla for that, which is why Tesla could start a price war and generally win that because no one else can make EVs profitably, or at least with as much profit. Also, you should also work with the government and corporates as much as possible. So you want to put as much of this tailwinds behind you as possible. So the IRA, great, go get those grants. Go get DOE loans. Don't shy away from those things because they're there to help. And again, make sure you have a durable moat, whether it's in the assembly line, whether it's in the innovation itself, whether it's in the quality and the user experience, something that no one else can copy, because the second you're successful, other people will come in and create Me Too products. And if there isn't a moat there, now you're competing with ad spend. You're trying to outspend on advertising, which destroys your gross margin and destroys your business. And then, because these are startups, well, in any business, capital efficiency is oftentimes the difference between life and death in the long run. What is capital efficiency? Every dollar you spend, whether it's in salaries, whether it's in product design, whether it's in legal fees, whatever, you're calculating what's the value actually being created by that spend? Is this an efficient use of that dollar? Or is it not well controlled? Oftentimes, startups, especially when they raise a lot of money, start spending like crazy, and they lose that sort of discipline that they had when they were seed stage or even Series A stage companies. So the final one is also consider all sources of capital. Venture is not the only source of capital. There's project financing. There's all sorts of different capital sources out there that have different return requirements. Loans, things like that. So it's easy to think, oh, VC is everything, but equity is the most expensive, or I should say the most valuable asset a company has, is its equity. So think about that last if possible. So this is like summarizing kind of those last traits of a Planetary Health company and the 10 sort of KPIs. And you could always like look at this and think about, oh, how's the business doing? How are we doing against these metrics? And you'll never be an A+ in all of them, but if you can, it's a good reminder of where to be looking and not overlooking anything. So great, those are 10 interesting ideas. How does it really stack up in the real world if we look at it as a case study? So just pick 2 companies that are pure climate and product. There's not many in the public markets, by the way. Tesla and Beyond Meat. With Tesla, we can go through all of these KPIs and see where they're at. And I roughly graded them green and yellow qualitatively. And so, yes, there's aggressive goals, a unique 10x product, a massive TAM. So when you say a high gross margin potential, it's important to also recognize it's going to be relative to your industry. So a car business doesn't need to be 80% gross margin like a software business to become excellent. It just needs to be better than the peers. And they did a lot better than their peers, which shows where their look at their multiple relative to the industry comp. Fast cash flows into the business. They innovated on all sorts of ways to get paid, right? Like $100, $200, $100 for the Cybertruck, to pre-order the Cybertruck, things like that. So these are ways that they upended the traditional cash flows of a car business as well. Finally, like I said, the moat. The moats are really important. And subsidies, they got a $465 million loan, which they repaid, and other car companies didn't at the time. Let's look at Beyond Meat. Now, Beyond Meat was, a lot of these things when it IPO'd were green and then turned red over time. They do have ambitious goals, but the messaging isn't particularly clear. They do not have a unique 10x product. The interesting thing is they do have a 10x better veggie burger when it came out, but that's great for vegetarians or vegans. The average meat eater has a hard time staying and making a permanent switch because it's not a 10x better product to real meat for most people. The gross margins, this is the most important, I think, stat here because it summarizes the rest. It started with 26% when it IPO'd, and it's now -2%. What happened? Well, there's just no sustainable competitive advantage. There's no moat. There's no efficiencies. It just had a hard time scaling in a way that kept the unit economics going in the right direction versus the wrong direction, and that's generally because of advertising costs and channel costs. For example, Tesla owns its own channels. Beyond Meat has to pay to get distributed through other people's channels. So that's a big cost. So these are like 10 hallmarks, right? And this is all rough, right? Like just roughly like taking a look at things in these lenses. So these are 10 hallmarks, and you could think of it as a graphic. This is the way I think about it, as a graphic equalizer. Some of these will be different at different times. Future work could be, what could be interesting is different shapes for different businesses or sectors. And also the shape changes over time from when you're a seed stage company to a mature 10 years post-IPO company. So I think if there is one thing to take away from this talk, it's build a 10x product, because no matter what, that's going to win in the marketplace. And if you could make that a sustainable, better choice for people, the tailwinds of capitalism will create success for you. There's an interesting, the interesting thing to me when I was thinking through this is it's a cool idea if we could make this happen, because if we could make 10x better products that people will pay for, that are sustainable, well, what's happened in, let's just call it 20 years time from today? All the things we use, powering the world, building the world, and feeding the world, are just better for us. And so I think like better experiences, I think like that creates a more utopian ideal of a future than a lot of the science fiction books and things like that I've read and seen. So this is what I'm hoping for and looking for and funding, at Mayfield. So, there's some future work to do for, students that are excited about some of this stuff. How do you formalize this a little bit more? But really, thank you, and special thanks to Naveen, who was a real thought partner on this and building this to fruition. Thank you, guys.
So I'll walk the mic around, but to head off one of the questions, this has all been recorded. We'll share it out to all of you who attended, so you can refer back to the talk and some of the slides at your leisure. But happy to take a few questions before we break for networking. So don't be shy, raise your hand. I'll bring the mic over to you if you have a question. I'm going to pick somebody from my team if we don't get a question. All right, Mark, you're up.
Thanks for the talk. It was great. I was curious about the lithos and how much carbon credits, the cost of carbon credit factors into like a decision by Google or the other fund.
I don't know with lithos. I'm not an investor in lithos, so I won't speak to that company. I can speak to the sort of business economics of carbon capture. I think right now, at a high price, relatively $300-ish, there are a small group of buyers in the world that will pay they'll use their high gross margin businesses to be able to use some of that free cash flow to say, hey, look, we're trying to help the world and create that goodwill. I think as enhanced rock weathering scales, all carbon sequestration companies scale, as those credits become more available, the price has to come down, and there's a floor. And there's a maximum capacity at each price of the number of customers out there. So I think like that's, for me, with carbon sequestration and measurement, the whole thing is really nailing accuracy and then price. Because if you don't have accuracy, it's hard to believe it. So you wouldn't pay for it.
Hey there, good to see you again.
Yeah.
So in environmental economics, there is Javon's paradox, which is essentially as something gets more efficient, we tend to use more of it. Think like lights, we don't really need 10 lights in here. Same thing, cars get more efficient, we make bigger cars. I'm curious, have you seen any kind of companies that have specifically tapped into that kind of behavioral economics?
No, I mean, I think it's all about making sense. So like, let's take your lights example. We make it efficient, we use more of it. I grew up with incandescent lights, right? Like you burn a little filament and it gets hot. And it's this nice warm glow, right? It's kind of like a little fire. And then LED lights come out and it's like, oh, this is gnarly, right? Like it's like, it makes everything look super, super nasty. But it's way, I mean, probably an order of, I don't know the actual number, but way more efficient, right? Like from 75 watts to 2 watts, less than 2 watts, right? I think, so you could 75, or you could like 30x the number of light bulbs. I don't think we have 30x the number of incandescents in here. So I think the idea of it's 1-to-1 might be false. It might be true that you do more, great, but I think again, in the long run, if we think about make better products more sustainably, there's a rate limit to what the most you need is for any given application. So I haven't seen anyone go like, hey, we could 10x the consumption of this thing if we make it more efficiently or better. I think consumption isn't dependent on supply these days. And I think that's one of the things, the root problems, or root things we're talking about. Consumption is dependent on resources that the purchaser has.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for a great talk. I would like to ask you how you think about creating the needs of community of people who are going to use technology tomorrow. Specifically, in many of these examples that you showed us, Tesla, it's about car. Well, we already had car. Yeah, it's a new thing, but it's not that new. A new leather things. We know what is the leather, just a substitute. Many times what I see is a substitute. There is nothing like early computers, like in 70s. Like people come with the computers, they bought computers, the need is created. And actually companies work in a direction of creating the needs. Like IBM pretty much lost a business in a personal computer because they didn't see that this need will be created and will be like a recurring pattern of people wanting more and more and more. While before they didn't have computers and they pretty much know what they can do with it. So my question is that in that landscape of green technology and planetary health and things like that, how you think about creating a new products that people will need and will move things in a good direction? Thank you.
I think it goes back to the hand of the consumer. I don't think we can predict, or I think it's fool's errand to try to really force things on consumers. As a product designer, I remember a lot of companies were trying to work on 3D TVs. I don't know if you guys remember this. They put on glasses, and who wants to wear glasses at home? Right? So I think the question is more on so these substitute products that you're talking about, it's kind of like, yes, we have leather seats in cars. Can we make a better feeling seat that gives people what they want, but is even better and sustainable? So I think that's a low-hanging fruit. Surmising something new is, I hope it happens, but there's a lot of work to be done even prior to that, or maybe not prior, at the same time as that. So I think one area that's new that hasn't existed before is direct air capture for carbon and carbon markets, and like that's a brand new thing. Who knows if it's sustainable through capitalism? I don't know the answer to that one yet. That's still being determined, which is why I like the idea of taking that CO2 and turning it into something useful. That's a little bit more predictable. Now, if those unit economics could work, then it is wholly predictable. So that's how I think about that. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else with a burning question? I'll walk back there. Making me get my steps in.
Thank you, Arvind. This was really interesting. I remember being in a meeting with you and the Indie Bio team
cool.
a few years ago.
Yeah.
And we were discussing a sustainable food product that was also healthier for people. And one of the people in the meeting said, investors will get confused by this product because you either do something that is sustainable or something that is healthier. Have things changed? Have you seen products and startups that receive funding and manage to do both things at the same time? Because the science is there to create new products, especially for food, that do both things.
I agree with you. I think it's difficult. I think the idea of staying, of sustainability, like what will people pay for, right? It goes back to that, what is a value proposition that is 10x better than something else? Am I looking on the shelves for something that's 10x more sustainable? Like I was at our grocery store and I saw these moonshot crackers. They're like sustainable crackers. I was like, that's cool. Is it 10x better tasting? Like, is that the dimension that I am in my mind frame, with when I'm looking for crackers on the shelf, or like for the girls? So I think like so if it's 10x healthier, yeah, I'll be like, oh, okay, well, I'm giving it's a girl snack, so how is it 10x healthier? Oh, and it's sustainable, awesome, right? Like, oh, cool. But I think like that's where I tend to go on these things these days, especially.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I liked another question here.
Yeah.
I liked your slide on kind of ultimately the markets is the hand of the consumer. And I've noticed, especially in climate tech, that a lot of VCs have trended first to B2B businesses. Curious kind of how you form that thesis around the consumer and really like what you're seeing, because I strongly agree with you. Curious what you're seeing and what they're missing.
Yeah. So let me be very clear. The consumer is the end driver. Businesses cater to consumers. So the question of the business model of the climate company is the question. Is it a consumer-facing company or is it an enterprise company that sells ingredients to create more sustainable products that are eventually consumers? If the consumer literally does not care, then it's all for naught. Now, you have two ways to go to create a real business through the enterprise. One, you could enable their products to be better for their customer, therefore win market share. Or you can also make it so much better that they win TAM, they increase their market share, right? Access to a new customer segment. You can also try to help them make it cheaper, but the problem is with that, that value proposition is not around performance, and so therefore you can't get a premium, and you're going to get squeezed. So again, that's not something I would look at as an investment. The flip side for the CEO, for the founder of that company, would say, well, we could either give the widget to someone else to make the thing, or we could just make the whole thing ourselves. And if making the whole thing is really difficult, oftentimes it's going to be something you don't want to do. Now, Tesla bucked that trend. And they went and built a car starting with Lotus, and then eventually bringing that expertise in-house. So I think, in the end, companies tend to be as vertically integrated as possible. Now the question is, where in the value chain do you hand off your product? So when I say consumer, I mean like that's the driver of everything. And it's just the rest is a value chain from raw ingredient to final product.
I saw your panel at TechCrunch this year with Poe.
Everywhere.
Yeah,
God.
we're stalking you. And it was fascinating, but I think what you were talking about, right, it was, what, September 19th, and you were talking about the valuations of these companies and really kind of the investment landscape right now, and it felt like it's pretty hard, and I don't think, Mayfield's not the only company that's having a challenging time, so I'm not asking you to predict the future, but, I mean, the current state of investments and the big opportunities for, capital to flow to these companies. I mean, what's going to help unlock more capital flowing to these companies? Where do you see that landscape right now, and are we still in that challenging space?
Yeah, we are in a challenging space. What gets capital flows exits, and these companies, providing a return to investors and other investors saying, "Oh my gosh, there's real money to be made here." And so I think one of the reasons for putting this together is how do we focus our collective efforts in a direction that can create those returns? And that's through making money. And how do we make money? By making better products that people buy.
Thanks. I was curious about the cotton company and how that plays into, statistics around fast fashion or criticisms around fast fashion, more going to the landfills, people wearing clothes, fewer repeat clothes, and then how that factors maybe into like a Patagonia worn wear model.
It's a great question. Actually goes to the earlier question, around making something that's not great more efficient and massive more consumption and making that just worse than it was. I think with the amount of water being used for cotton, fast fashion, again, I think we have to be, I try to be careful of conflating too many problems at once and making the whole thing an intractable mess, right? So there's solve a problem that is understandable. Plants need water to grow a certain amount of cotton of a certain quality. If you could look at the plant genetics and marry sort of like high quality fibers that need a lot of water and low quality fibers that don't need much water, and marry those two and get the best of both worlds, great. Now how much change can you actually, does that 10x the amount of clothing that people are buying on Shein? I don't think so. Because I don't think they're buying on the amount of water being used. And they're buying on what they saw on Instagram or wherever people are finding these things. So again, I'll go back to, it's kind of like a light bulb question again. I don't know the answer to that question other than, hey, if we can make every light bulb use 10x less energy, I don't think we're going to 10x the amount of clothing we buy. So we should net save.
Take one more question before we wrap up if anybody has a burning question. All right.
Thank you for your speech. I had a question. You spoke about in order to make a product competitive in the market, you either make it better, make it cheaper, or required by law. Yeah. I'm wondering if you've...
Yeah, probably true.
Okay. Well, anyways, I'm wondering if you've been able to invest or work with any companies that have focused on that third one, being required by law.
No, I can't predict that, right? So like, as an investor, I try to do things that, there's so many things not in your control, like almost everything. So requiring by law is like, it's just the one that's the hardest, especially these days, right? Because the laws are dictated a lot of times, especially around product adoption, around which party is in power, which is hard to predict. So I think the IRA is a great example of that, and around hydrogen. Hydrogen is a market that could, if we could have endless amounts of green hydrogen at very low prices, we can really create a carbon economy, right? CO2, hydrogen is a building block of a lot of stuff. But there's a long way to go before you start that chicken and egg, and kickstart that. So The IRA is a great example, and it did bring a lot of investors into the hydrogen market. So like I saw a ton of pitches in the past year around hydrogen. The question is, does that market only exist when the IRA is in existence? I don't know the answer to that, right? But it's one more, if capitalism can't drive it today, then it becomes a lot harder, and you are making an investment in something that you're hoping will happen in the future that hasn't materialized today. So I think that investment is possible, but at a different stage, or like every stage of investment has a different set of parameters of risks. Later stage, less risk. So I think you could do those things in the earlier stage, but I think it's harder in the much later stage when there's still a lot of questions around an nascent industry. But if you make it right, if you guess right, I mean, what a moat.
Well, please join me in thanking Arvind one more time for coming out and speaking with us.